Now, these past few weeks, we have been studying characters of the Bible whose stories have just been forged into history as these radical givers. They are these people that, although the characters themselves might seem pretty obsolete, the impact that they left has changed the history of the church. And today is no different. Today, I want to talk about somebody who experienced the gospel and was inspired to extreme evangelistic giving, where she actually opened up her home to become the first Christian church in her city. She's someone who, through her generosity, through her giving, and through her service, she became a local leader of the church. Her name was Lydia. Now, Lydia, is not a major character in the Bible. If we flip open to her story in Acts chapter 16, we'll see that she's really only got one paragraph written about her. But her impact, it reaches well beyond what was written. And looking at what's said in scriptures, as well as kind of bringing in some sources from what we know of the culture at the time, we can actually paint a pretty good picture of who Lydia was. So starting in verse 14, we hear this about her. It says, "One who heard us was a woman named Lydia, from the city of Thyatira, a seller of purple goods, who was a worshiper of God." So right away, we can learn three things. First of all, she's from this city called Thyatira. Now it was one of the wealthiest cities in the area. So for Lydia to have either been born there or just to live there, that means that she had a little bit of dough. And secondly, it says she's a seller of purple goods. Purple, the color of royalty. Lydia was a business owner who sold to these high-end clients. She's wealthy business owner. And finally, it says she was a worshiper of God. And so at this time, she's still a Jewish worshiper. She hasn't encountered Jesus Christ or the gospel yet. And actually in verse 13, right before this, it says that she would go over to the city of Philippi. They didn't have a synagogue, except they would gather at this unofficial place where they would come together and pray. And it's at this gathering place that Paul, Silas, and Luke, these three missionaries, they encounter Lydia for the first time. And so Paul, one of these men, he begins preaching, and this must have been a killer of a sermon, because look at Lydia's response in verse 15. It says, "After she was baptized, and her whole household as well, she urged us, saying, 'If you have judged me to be faithful to the Lord, come into my house and stay.'" Lydia was immediately baptized, along with her whole household. So this meant any children, any servants, any cooks, any cleaners, you name it. They were all baptized and welcomed into the household of God. And then she continues, and she urged Paul, Silas, and Luke to come and actually stay with her in her house. Now again, with what we know from the culture at the time, this isn't just like an overnight motel kind of stay. Lydia is actually inviting these men to kind of treat her house as a home base for their work in Philippi. Her home becomes a sort of a mission hub for the city of Philippi. And this kind of thing, it's pretty common actually in these Roman colonies. Women like Lydia, women who had a little bit of money, they would patron these things or become patrons of these things. There was a culture of patronage where people would align themselves with one specific mission or one specific public work, and they would fund it with incredible passion and zeal. This is what Lydia became for the church. She made the church's mission her own mission in life. She became what we might call a patron of the church, or we would even say a gospel patron. Now, these gospel patrons, these people that we've been studying the past few weeks, they have this unique calling from God. It's this call to go above and beyond the ordinary, to live and give, to see this gospel message propelled to all corners of the world. And see, not everybody has this call on them. Not even everyone in this room has this call to be a gospel patron. But as we wrestle with the idea that, perhaps God is calling me to greater levels of giving, as we wrestle with this call, we've been identifying a few characteristics of these gospel patrons. And the one characteristic I want to focus on today is just the sense of urgency that Lydia had. See, gospel patrons, their work, it is defined, it is fueled by a passion-filled urgency. They've experienced the gospel in such ways that they can't help but to share this message with the world as quickly as they can. Now, this word urgency, I hear this word and many emotions come to mind. The anxiety, it just kind of starts to bubble up inside of me. It's not a pretty word. Often when we hear urgency, we'll think of like a stressful, rushed scramble to some sort of deadline. Or we have this notion that if we gave everything we owned in this instant, it still wouldn't be plentiful enough or quick enough. Okay, this is not the urgency we are going to talk about today. I don't want to talk about some fear-based doom, but instead, I want to look at a passion-filled urgency. An urgency that is inspired by love rather than by fear. To illustrate this, I want to share with all of you guys one of my wife and I's greatest passions as of lately. We have this passion, and I guarantee you probably haven't experienced it yet, except it will change your lives. We have a passion for the Culver's salted caramel pumpkin concrete mixer. It is even better than it sounds. And doesn't it just look incredible up there? The Culver Salted Caramel Pumpkin Concrete Mixer. It will change your lives. I have a passion for this caramel pumpkin perfection in a cup. It is just a staple of the fall, back where we were from in Wisconsin. And, until you've slurped your first Culver Salted Caramel Pumpkin Concrete Mixer, you have not lived. You've got to try this. The only problem for us, though, is I've got this passion, but the nearest Culver's to us in Houston here is over 40 minutes away. And rush hour, that means well over an hour. And any reasonable person would say, 1 hour is just way too long for one milkshake. But again, when it comes to the Culver's Salted Caramel Pumpkin Concrete Mixer, I am not a reasonable person. I just had to have one of these, and I had to have it now. So you better believe that we drove over an hour just so I could taste one of these, and it was incredible. See, my passion for this thing, my passion fueled my urgency. This is the urgency I want us to keep in mind today. It's not this fear-based doom. It's not a stressful obligation, but it is a love-inspired immediacy, a passion-filled urgency. This is the passion that gospel patrons, the urgency that they understand in their lives. And so as we consider this urgency, it's helpful to know that there's really three main truths at play that lead into this urgency. These gospel patrons recognize, or at least have experienced, these three truths in their life. The first truth is the simple fact that the stakes are high. Gospel patrons, they recognize that, there are high stakes to this. And Paul, he describes this in the letter to the Romans that he wrote. Starting in verse 13, he says, "Everyone who calls on the name of the Lord will be saved." We are talking about salvation here. Salvation is what's at stake. He continues, he says, "How are they going to call on him in whom they have not believed? And how are they to believe in him of whom they have never heard? And how are they to hear without someone preaching? How are they to preach unless someone is sent?" You can see this very linear logic that Paul is using here. And the bottom line of his logic is this. It's that if nobody is sent, or if nobody goes, or as we've learned in the past few weeks, if nobody gives, then nobody hears. And if nobody hears, then nobody is saved. Paul, what he's doing is he's drawing a direct correlation between someone being sent and somebody else being saved. He draws this line between going out and somebody being saved. If nobody hears, nobody believes, and no one is saved. These stakes are incredibly high. And I can just feel my own heartbeat start to rise a little bit. This is a lot of pressure here. Like, why would any gospel patron ever take on this kind of pressure? But again, I want to remind you, these patrons, they don't operate out of an urgency driven from fear. They don't operate from a fear of lack. They don't operate out of a fear that somebody might never hear the gospel. Instead, what they do is they function with this joy, with this excitement. This excitement that wherever the gospel is preached, there we have a promise that somebody might come to salvation. These gospel patrons recognize that their giving, it has a real, tangible impact. Gospel patrons recognize that their giving is tied to someone else's salvation, tied to hearing the gospel. These are high stakes, and it inspires some to an urgency. And the second main truth that plays into our urgency is this. Gospel patrons recognize that we have a personal calling, or that the call is on us. To explain this, we should take a step back first, and we should look into the heart of God. Again, Paul helps us out. In Romans 10, he gives us a little glimpse into the heart of God. He says this in verse 12. The same Lord is Lord of all, bestowing his riches on all who call on him. God has a passion. God has a passion to bless his people. He deeply desires to bestow his riches on everyone. He has a passion for his people, a passion for you and a passion for me. But now God, he pursues this passion in what we might call an odd way. You see, instead of just the instant gratification of God directly dropping these blessings into people's lives, he chooses to work through you and through me. Instead of just zapping the message of the gospel into people's brains, God speaks, he works, he talks through you and through me. This was the whole point of Paul's, how are they going to call on God unless they hear message? God helps his people with his people. God pursues his passion to bless his people with his people. And that's exactly what happens here. Here at St. Mark, God is deeply craving to bless people here. He has a passion, and he has brought you and I in on this mission. He has placed a call on you and on me. And gospel patrons like Lydia, they have recognized this personal calling. And Lydia, for example, she opened up her home to become what we might call the first Christian church in Philippi. And so you and I think, well, good for her. I don't have a house to spare kind of thing. Like, I cannot give the biggest and the greatest gifts like some of these other people. But think about this, that if God was only looking to work with the best and with the greatest, why would he choose to work through a broken and sinful humanity? See, God, his call that he extends to us, it's not done out of necessity, but instead out of grace. God has a passion for his people. God has a passion to work with you. See, the call is on us. Finally, gospel patrons, they understand one more truth. They understand this final truth that passion, it can really only flow out of personal experience. See, gospel patrons, they have experienced the gospel in such a way in their lives that they have seen the life-changing capabilities. See, without this personal testimony or without this personal experience, the passion, it's always going to be lacking. And we've all probably met someone with a similar passion. A passion that flows out of an experience. And even if it's not this passion about the gospel, it could be about anything. Have you ever met someone in your life who they're just so uncontrollably passionate about something they can't stop talking about it? For me, I experienced this firsthand when my friend, he got an Apple Watch for the first time. And this was the only thing he could talk about for weeks on end. And the first day I was like, all right, cool. I'll sit back here and I'll listen to these life-changing features of the new Apple Watch. But somehow he just continued to squeeze this watch into any and every conversation, regardless of the topic. And finally, after 1 week, I just wanted to rip this thing off his arm and say, enough about your watch already. But I couldn't blame him. Because once you have experienced something that has changed your life, you can't help but to share it with others. This is the passion. This is the urgency that fuels these gospel patrons. And some of you here today, you might be thinking, that kind of sounds a little like me. My experiences at this place, at St. Mark here, have been incredible. I have experienced God at work in beautiful ways, and I want other people to hear about this. And if that is you today, that is great. I challenge you to wrestle with this idea that perhaps God is calling you to become a gospel patron. Perhaps God is calling you to join him in his mission, to join him in his passion of blessing other people, especially through your gifts. And at the same time, there's others of us here today where you might be thinking that I don't really have that uncontrollable passion you just described. And if that's you today, I'm here to tell you that, that is okay. Despite the fact that you might not have this rabid passion for the gospel, you are still just as loved and you are still just as forgiven as the next person here. Your lack of passion, it doesn't make you any less of a Christian. And I'm not going to stand up here and I'm not going to tell you that you need to manufacture some sort of emotion that you just don't have. So the reality is this, that if you don't have that urgency, if you don't have that passion to spread the gospel with others, maybe this is just a good time. Maybe this is just a good place for you where you can just rest and you can just return to this gospel. See, here at St. Mark, this is a place where God seeks his passion. God's passion is for you. God's passion is to bless you. And he's going to do that through people just like you and me. This is a room filled with people, just like me, who time and time again have needed to come running back to just rehear this message of Jesus' love and Jesus' forgiveness time and time again. This is a place filled with people who have been shaped by the power of the gospel. This is a place where God is seeking to bless you. God is seeking to shower you in his grace, in his love, and he is going to do that in many ways, one of which is all of these people in here. God has a passion for you. And my prayer is that your experiences here at St. Mark would change your life. And to the rest of us here today, I want to extend to you all a challenge. Or I want to encourage you to just reflect on your encounters of the gospel here in this place. Have you experienced God's grace in a way that has changed your life? As we lift up and as we learn from gospel patrons such as Lydia, we see these people who were shaped by the gospel. Lydia is a story of somebody who encountered the gospel and who had a passion inspired in her. She is somebody who made God's passion, her own mission as she took on a personal calling. Lydia is somebody who recognized that, yes, the stakes are high, and this inspired her to urgent giving. So I want you to reflect on your experiences. How is God working in your time here? How is God calling you to a heightened sense of urgency? And I want to challenge you to reflect on this. How could God be calling me to greater levels of giving, to greater levels of leading, or to greater levels of serving in this place? How is God calling you? And as we think about this, I just want to return real quick to the Culver's Salted Caramel Pumpkin Concrete Mixer. First of all, I'm worried you all aren't taking me seriously in this. For real, it is going to change your lives. Go out immediately after this service, carve out 3 hours of your day, because you'll need it, and go get one of these Culver Salted Caramel Pumpkin Concrete Mixers. It's going to change your life. But in a much more real sense, isn't that why we are here today? Don't we believe that what we have in this place, that it has the power to change your life? How many of us have been transformed by the work of God in this place? I truly, truly believe that God is at work here. That the passion of God, that the mission of this church, that the message of the gospel, it has the power to change lives. And so my question to you is, how are we going to share this with the world? Let's pray. Please stand as we join together in prayer. And as we move into this time, we recognize multiple things. First, we have Thanksgiving coming up on Thursday. It's a time where we can just express our gratitude and our thankfulness for many things, one of which the joining of Everly into the family of God through baptism. At the same time, we recognize that holidays can be a difficult season for many people. Whether it's loved ones lost or whatever it may be, we all carry different emotions into this season.